Okay, this is the Grass is Greener on WXRW 104.1 FM in Milwaukee. I am the host of the program, Gary Grass. With me is my co-host, Babette Gruneau.
Hi, and today we're happy to have Haitam Salawdeh. He is a Palestinian activist with the U.S. Palestinian Community Network. He's originally from Doma, Palestine, and is now a resident of Milwaukee. I recently heard him speak at a commemoration of the International Human Rights Day. Welcome, Haitam Salawdeh.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
And we did have you like a few years back, so we do consider you a friend of the show, and we welcome you back to the program.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, we talked back in 2016 or 17 when my village was under attack, when settlers came to the village and firebombed the home and killed basically everybody in it except the then 5-year-old kid that survived. Mom, dad, and the 18-year-old baby were murdered at that event.
Well, I guess that kind of underscores a point that has been made many of times before this, but is kind of very prevalent here, which is like people sort of like woke up to this on October 7th, but even though there's like a sort of a new scale here and a lot of new particulars, there's an aspect of this which is certainly not new. And what's going on in Palestine now is a continuation of years and years of just a real nastiness directed against the Palestinian people.
Yeah, it's really interesting how history starts when victors and when white men and women wanted to start. We are silent when back into last year in 2023, before October 7, over 400 Palestinians died in that year leading up to October 7. Many villages, including Hawara and Tumusaya, were like ransacked, and basically people came through, or settlers came through and burnt cars and destroyed homes and destroyed buildings. And somehow that doesn't really trigger, and that doesn't register on the Richter scale, of Western geopolitics, because Babette heard me speak, and what I was saying is that the who is doing what to whom kind of matters, because it's only relevant to the media and to CNN and so on when the suffering is done to somebody that we care about. Otherwise, when brown and black people are subjected to atrocities, it's kind of seen as the norm, and this is how life goes, and it's normal, and we don't even report it. And all of a sudden, when something in contrast happens and people fight back, that's when everybody stands up.
Oh, wait, something affected people we actually care about?
Yes, exactly. People stand up, and then the general population doesn't see what lead to it, so they're just like confused, and it's like, we thought everything is hunky-dory, and all of a sudden these Arabs, these terrorists are fighting our beloved Israelis. When in fact all along, Arabs in Palestine have been dispossessed, have been people in Gaza have been refugees many times over. I mean, I'm talking like tens of times over, even before October 7. These people that ransacked the settlements around Gaza, these settlements is where they came from. Originally, these people who are refugees in Gaza were living in these states, in Ascalon and all these cities around Gaza. And they are sitting inside Gaza now in refugee camps, looking at occupiers of their own land. And that doesn't register really. People don't see it like that, right? People just assume that this refugee was born in that land and was born refugee. Their parents were refugees, and Arabs are destined to have been refugees all along,
I heard in some news reports that after the rebels broke through the wall or whatever it is, the fencing, or flew over the fencing, that other people came through, just ordinary people, just to see the places that they had once lived in. That they went back, at least briefly, to see their villages. Of course, their villages weren't there anymore, but they wanted to see.
Yeah, because also remember that these people who lived in Gaza have been under siege for about 20 some years. And when I say siege, I mean like literally a prison, where to get out of Gaza is generally like a big endeavor. It's not like you can pick your car up and you can go to the borders of Egypt or even to the West Bank. Like they couldn't go to the West Bank even if they wanted to. There was a big endeavor to get like the license, so to speak, to go into the West Bank, go to colleges and schools in the West Bank, or go to work. And these people like basically were in a big prison, and what they heard about the places that they came from, it's just stories. They heard their parents talk about it, they heard their grandparents talk about it, and they look over it because Gaza is flat. You can look and see these settlements that have green grass, lots of running water, and all the amenities, and they live in refugee camps. And yes, when the fencing was broken through, people just flooded. People went and they wanted to see what's going on. They wanted to see where they came from. They wanted to see what it even looks like. Because I think a lot of people don't realize, and I'm gonna say something that might be shocking to many of you. I lived in Palestine for 18 years. I've never set foot in a Jewish-only camp, like Jewish-only settlement, Jewish-only city, Jewish-only anything. So for us, it's kind of we don't even know what it looks like. We don't know what's the inside. Some Palestinians have set foot in there because they were used as workers, and when you are occupied, you are generally occupied by many means and by many ways. One is by disposition and taking your land away, and the other one by economic occupation. You have no choice and no chance but to work for your occupiers. And Palestinians have done that, where they would go to settlements, they would work in settlements. I personally, who hasn't worked in a settlement, have never been and have never seen a Jewish-only settlement. So it's kind of like, imagine you living in Milwaukee, have never been to Brookfield. You don't even know what Brookfield looks like. That's me. The settlements were not that far away, maybe 20, 10 kilometers, 5-6 miles.
Right.
I could see them from over the hills, but no more.
Yeah, and you have to go through 5 checkpoints to get to Glendale, and the paperwork if you wanted to get to Whitefish Bay is just insurmountable.
Absolutely. The paperwork is hard, and you know what? Your safety is is at best at question. So unless you really have to, you don't do it.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean the people that say this was basically a prison break. I mean I think people kind of hear that as rhetoric and do not really picture why this is viewed as just a large open air prison, because it basically is. I'm not sure how to say it any differently. It's like a prison is a prison.
A prison is a prison. There is walls. I think I
Although
compare
I
it
visit
more.
prisons all the time, and I think I have an easier time getting into like Stanley Correctional Institution than I would into Gaza.
Yeah. Oh, there's no question. I also think that I would compare it more to the slave revolt, because while it is an open air prison, the me and you, the doers and the doers too, are kind of not on the same level of humanity, right? Like the African American enslaved person was not seen as a human being by the white guy, and there you had a dehumanization campaign that took many years, that is very similar to what we see in Palestine. While I understand prisoners are seen as subhumans here too, like that, don't get me wrong. I understand that the prison systems and how people who are incarcerated are treated. In Gaza, because you are talking about two different ethnically distinguishable people, like the African Americans and the whites, because you are doing that, it takes on a different kind of dynamics, and that dynamic, I think, makes Gaza and what happened in Gaza closer related to the slave revolts than it is to just a prison break. Because a prison break is, you want your freedom, you want to just get rid of this and run out of the prison. Well, in Gaza, it's more than that. It has to also do with the fact that you want your national identity. You want to be seen as a Palestinian with self-determination, with the right of return to your land and to your homes. And so the dimension here is a little bit more than a prison break. But certainly,
Well,
I think a prison break is a first
yeah, I
step
mean, well,
to
I
explain
mean,
it.
I mean, the prisoners that I talk to, because I do represent criminal defendants, right?
Hmm.
They are all waiting to get out. None of them are thinking that they are going to be in prison for the rest of their lives, and their children are going to follow them, and they're going to be in prison for the rest of their lives, and their children's children until something is done to completely change the system.
Right.
Yeah, I
But,
think that is very key that um, in a prison, people at least have been convicted of doing something wrong, whereas here it's sort of a concentration camp in that uh, you have your whole family there, and and for generation after generation, and it doesn't matter what you do, you can be the most upright and never do a thing that would be wrong or is considered wrong um, by the ruling Israelis, and still you're going to be there. You're stuck.
yep, yep. It's your fault as being Palestinian. It's not what you do, it's who you are.
Right.
And by definition, and you can change that really easily, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's and the rhetoric coming out of so many like Israeli officials and like I mean, just across the spectrum of Israeli society. Whenever there's like interviews with a lot of these folks, it's the justification for killing children is well, the children are terrorists because they're born terrorists because that's just who they are. This you're using terrorist as an ethnic term, not as a like criminal term.
yep, yep. Um, and I have to remind everyone that Netanyahu didn't come from the moon. Netanyahu is a result of a society that brought him to power and brought a
And from
coalition that made
Poland.
him in power. Yeah,
It didn't come from the moon; it came from Poland.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
So
and you have and you've had you've had this whole like I mean, although people can talk about how this pattern goes back to 1948 and beyond, but there people who have been reporting from the occupied territories for over the course of decades, can mark a real shift in terms of the politics of the area and the attitudes of the area, where there had been some kind of like idealism at one point in the past, where a lot of the dirty history was kind of hidden, and people were kind of like Jews were raised in Israel without really knowing anything really about the Nakba. I mean, there were obviously the old guys that participated in it, but there was
yeah,
like, and then it's like over the course of a generation, you saw this really kind of like persistent inculcation of just hatred of Palestinians and a general shift in society to become much less liberal and much more fascistic over the course of a couple decades. And I mean that kind of cultivation of hate. I mean it's just it comes every accusation is an admission, right? Because I remember from decades ago, this whole thing about Palestinians teaching their children to hate Jews, and it's like, I mean, I see no evidence of that. I see tons of evidence of the reverse process, right? Where a generation of Israelis has been like carefully trained to really hate and totally dehumanize Palestinian people, and
yeah. And you said fascistic. I think this is a post-fascist society. I think fascism is like in the rear view mirror of the society. It is unbelievable how not only do they do what they do and it's horrendous, but they also present themselves as the victims. I mean, it's just like ridiculous how, um, and it happens because you can dehumanize, and it only can happen, and it's only possible is because if you see the others as non-human, and they have said it multiple times. I mean, politicians, rabbis in Israel have declared Palestinians as really below human, and it's okay to kill them, and we are God's chosen, and we are the best, and what we do is basically ordained by God, and it's okay. So when you are in a position where you are told and you know that you cannot do wrong, and there is no law that applies to you, all laws apply to other people, but not to you. You are just only answering to or answerable to God. Um, I think you are post-fascistic at this point. Like I don't really know even what to describe you. It's it's unfettered access to hate and to killing, and they show it. I mean, they definitely show it. In the village in Doma where I was talking about. Since I came to your show, Doma's Doma has shrunk. I mean, literally, there are places that I would go with my kids who grew up in Mawat here in Milwaukee. We would go and we would go outside of Doma and walk around and see, the nature around that town. If we were to go today, half of these places are non-accessible to us. They have been taken by settlers. And this is a small town with a small story. And you take that and you multiply it by, hundreds and thousands. The total land grab, the total economic kind of siege that Palestinians are under, so that you can force them to leave, to go to work somewhere else, to go to study somewhere else. Um, it's it's ethnic cleansing at its best.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like has been this sort of escalation, and it's like, it's not linear, right? Because it's like everything kind of going on at once at all different levels at the same time. But you can, I mean, people kind of blend the terms together. But I think the first level is apartheid, where people are just physically separated from one another, and then there's ethnic cleansing, where people are consistently removed to smaller and smaller areas, and then there's genocide, where they're just eliminated entirely. And I think you see all three processes going on at the same time at different places. But there's some parts of the occupied territories that are still mostly just in an apartheid state, and that's
Yep.
just phase one. And
Yep.
and, and
Yep.
it's
Exactly.
and it's I mean, if you go back, and I know some people really detest this comparison, but you go back to Nazi Germany, and you have like language that was developed for this process, right? This stage is ghettoization, and this stage is whatever. You could just kind of take that imprint and say, I mean, and it's not, it wasn't just Nazi Germany, because I mean, they took a lot of their stuff from the United States. Like, look, if
Hmm.
you do what we did to the Native Americans here, that's a model for us. And Israel has also gone out. I mean, and there have been reports, back when they were having like the height of the genocide in Guatemala back in the 80s. They had Israeli instructors come and train the genocidists, right, about the Palestinianization of the Ixil Indians in Mayan Indians in Guatemala. It's like this is a pattern that gets repeated over and over and over and gets copied from place to place. And if people think this is not their concern because it's happening to someone else, they just don't know history, because this stuff never remains contained. It always goes from one place to another to another.
Well said. And today, I mean, don't go back to Guatemala back then. I mean, in India and Kashmir, India now uses the Israeli model in Kashmir, the exact same way settlements are built and people are moved around, and they don't even say it in a um, shyly or lie about it. The UN ambassador to India declared, we are going to learn from Israel, and we are going to do what they are doing. Like oppressors learn from each other for sure, but on the other hand, the oppressed do the same. And I think don't expect to use these tools and kill people and have them just sit there. It's not going to happen. And so history. Doesn't repeat the actions of the oppressor. It also repeats, the actions of the oppressed. We learn from what other people have done, and we will improve on it where we can, and repeat what it was done where we can.
Although I wouldn't be fatalistic about it, because I think people that have been exposed to different types of violence, some of them will react by becoming violent, some of them will react in different ways. I mean, there's some really nice. I mean, there are both horror stories and there are inspirational stories that have come out of this, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
and it all depends on the moment, though. It all depends on where you are, what tools you have, and what you can what what you can achieve by what means. I think Gandhism. Even Gandhi, has he done what he did in a different time? It might have not worked. He did it in a time where the empire was at a shamble, and it has worked. So it all depends. I think the moment dictates the tools sometimes.
yeah. I mean, people have said this too about Martin Luther King. I mean, a lot of the strategy there was you go and you be good and you just reveal how horrible the other side is, and there's shock and there's outrage, and things start to change because of all the outrage, because people are moral and they look at this and they're confronted by this horror. But that doesn't always work. I mean, sometimes
No, it doesn't.
I don't have to tell you. Nothing that I say I really think I have to tell you.
Yeah.
But it's this. Sometimes people just see it and they go, that's happening to someone else. I really need to get to work. I'm gonna be late.
Also, it depends a lot on who your oppressor is and what they are willing to do, because there have been many attempts by the Palestinian people to peacefully resist. I remember when they were marching up to the wall, and
Yep.
the kids would be marching up to the wall, and I mean, the response was often shooting of the kids. I mean, that by the Israeli soldiers would just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that First Intifada is a good example, right? It was unarmed, largely civil disobedience. The biggest weapon we had were stones. Um, and yet, bones were broken. I don't know if people still remember the images of the four soldiers taking a 12-year-old and with stones, like breaking his hand to just make sure he cannot throw stones again. Um, and it becomes a question for you. So, as a Palestinian, if you are a terrorist, if you say something, if you are a terrorist, if you do something, if you are a terrorist, regardless of what you do, well, then it doesn't matter what you do at that time. Right? There just should. If I can throw a rocket, might as well. If I'm going to be as bad as somebody throwing a stone. Um, I think the other thing that we have to remember is that the attempt by the Palestinians to do kind of the trap that the Israelis and the Americans set for them, which is the whole peace process and two-state solution.
Oh,
Yeah. Um, they fell. I mean, they fell for it, and the result of that peace process was much worse than anything could have happened had they still stayed resisting and had they still stayed, with their stones at the street. It shows like what this occupation has showed us is that if you give an inch, they will take a mile. Like you just cannot let your guard down a minute with them. They are like foxes. They are so sly, and they will use time to their advantage, and they will keep you in details that are so ridiculous. Like if you look at the Oslo agreements and the
yeah.
details they were
Yeah.
discussing with the Palestinians for years, it's crazy.
I mean, the peace
Go ahead.
process is essentially, war by other means. It's never seen as a route to peace. It's seen as a route to victory.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how they were able to get from 80,000 settlers to close to a million settlers in the West Bank.
I mean,
Um,
so the
as
Palestinian communities have really shrunk, right?
the Palestinian communities have shrunk. The Palestinian, um,
just geographically, just small.
exactly. Yes. The land, obviously, like land is it's not infinite, right? There's like only a specific amount of land, and so when one area grows, the other shrinks. And like I told you, Doma in just the last 8 years just basically lost half of its surrounding areas to settlers. Um, and it's and some of the land that it loses to settlers is not officially lost to settlers, in that like the Israelis don't come and say we are going to take this area with you. What they will do is they will have soldiers sitting somewhere protecting settlers who will come and who will kill you if you come close to this land, so you don't come to the land. And so a year later they'll say, well, this wasn't used, so we just are going to come and use it because it wasn't used. And there was, even in the 80s, a documented systematic way of land grabbing, in which they would come and they would declare a piece of land a military closed area. We're going to use it for exercising, and they'll use it for 2 years, and then after 2 years they'll come and they will declare it as an absent owner land. This is like a very old 500-year-old Turkish law that used to be in the books in Palestine, where if a land has not been cultivated for 3-4 years, then the state can take it. And so that's what they would do. They would take my land.
There's just one of those Ottoman Empire laws that they never got around to changing.
Yeah, they are not. Yeah, it fits them. Why would they change it, right? But they want it. So they would use that law, and they would consider that legal. So so the fact that they can tell their citizens and their Supreme Court that this is a legal action, well, first of all, legal doesn't make it right, as many African Americans can, former enslaved people can tell you who where slavery was legal in many of these states. So legal doesn't make it right. And second of all, this veneer of legality is even not right because you forced the conditions upon which this land was seen as unattended to, because you would shoot the owner if she were to come close to the olive grove and try to do anything, because you declared it a military protected or military zone. So
Yeah,
it's
I mean, you used to hear stories about like, human rights lawyers assisting Palestinians, and I think that must be the most like brain-racking occupation to be like in such a Kafkaesque system and like be the attorney. Um, le-
Veni Sarlanger was a very prominent Israeli citizen who represented Palestinians for many years. Um, I went to college in Germany back in the 80s, and she decided that living in Israel, representing Palestinians, is actually counterproductive. That prominent Israeli lawyer decided that Germany, the former oppressor of her people, is a better place to be than Israel, and she actually moved to Göttingen um, and abandoned her citizenship because she was seen as giving a legal facade to something that's totally criminal. She was used by the Israelis to say, "Look, we have people representing these folks," and yet her representation made zero impact.
let me say that this kind of like it triggers me back to what I was going to say earlier, which is, I mean, we're recording this on December 14th, right? And I
Mhm.
was just seeing in my Twitter today news about how the Palestinian Authority had cut all electricity to Jenin, and it's like, I mean, you want to talk about the role of the Palestinian Authority in any of this? I mean, the outcome of Oslo was just horrendous in terms of what it set up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the current Palestinian Authority is, you have to remember, like, if you were to count them, the people that actually have anything, it's like a few hundred people, honestly. Like, that's your authority. And the only reason they are able to actually exist is because Israel protects them. And we all know that this authority, its main purpose is to be protective of Israel and the Israelis. So they,
It gives a
um,
facade to Israel, right?
yeah, I mean, it's basically saying, um, you Palestinians, you have a leadership, even though this leadership, as the top person in that leadership, Abbas, said a few years ago that he lives under the boots of the Israeli soldier. I mean, he cannot leave Ramallah without permission. He cannot do anything without Israeli permission. They are basically like a go between the Palestinians people and their occupier. And as a go between, um, they are useless to us because they cannot affect the policies of the occupier. And they basically just add one more layer of bureaucracy to our life. Before, I would need to go to the Israeli military kind of court to do what I need to do. Now I go to them and they take it to the Israeli
It's
administration. I mean,
I'm thinking of like Hogan's Heroes, where the POWs have their like ranking officer, who's the person who takes requests to the commandant of the prison, right? It's like it seems like that's their role. It's like
it is that role, except that they are corrupt. So the prisoner that takes maybe the stuff, his corruption might not be as bad, and he might even feel bad for the prisoners he's representing.
and
These guys,
also we're running a secret underground cell,
yes,
for
yes,
the
yes,
Allies.
begging, yeah, helping, helping. These guys don't do that. I mean, they feel like, they get specific amount of benefits, that's monetary benefits, nothing really self-deterministic. They are allowed to go faster than other Palestinians at checkpoint, for example. So they get VIP passes to bypass checkpoints. They can stick them up. Like, how helpful is that? To me as a Palestinian, it's not, but to them, that's something they show up with. They get probably sometimes first dibs on land that is known to be Israel will not take, for example, and so they can do deals with the Israelis. Um, they can be used to intermediate with other Arab business people. I mean, they are just basically a tool, and there are not many of them that thing can collapse in no time.
I did want to ask a question about the changeover now with uh, the settlers becoming they have like their own militias and such, and things seem to be really heating up in the West Bank. Where I mean, we're not seeing it on the news. We see a bit of Gaza, though not all that much, and but we aren't seeing the repression in the West Bank. And I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so to start with, I want to point out that many of these settlers are soldiers during the day, and then they go back to their settlements and they become so-called civilians. So I think anybody, in the past years who lived in the South can tell you that, the judges and the marshals and the police officers used to be police officers during the day, and then at night they put on the sheets. I think that's very similar to in the West Bank. Most of these people are indeed armed um, during the day, and they take their weapons and go. What Ben Gafir and Smotrich want to do is to take it one step further and um, basically arm every single one. I think they have distributed already 80,000 or so pieces of automatic weaponry um, to their settlers. And these settlers are, fanatic is, I don't know if there is in the English dictionary, if there is something that can be used post the word fanatic, because it really doesn't describe them um, as accurately as it should, because their fanaticism really is very similar to ISIS's fanaticism, right? They are the only right, and human life doesn't really have any value, and they are not accountable to the law. Like when they do something to a Palestinian, it doesn't really affect them negatively in any way. And if that's something even where as bad as burning their homes or killing them or doing whatever, because it's just the only thing you need to do is to say, oh, I was defending myself. Oh, they were about to do XYZ. Or, I mean, so with that absolute immunity, you can imagine how kind of life is for a Palestinian in the West Bank today. It's
Or in 15 years, he was going to grow up and hate me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm killing Hitler as a baby before he became an adult. Um, so you can see, people don't feel safe at all. People even like I can use Doma as an example. Like our folks after 6, 7 o'clock, like nobody really leaves the village. I mean, um, we still kind of self-impose curfews because you don't know what's gonna lurk there in the streets, and um, yeah, it's a really horrendous situation for the West Bank folks. Now, comparing to Gaza, right? Like this is nothing. So that's why people don't really think about it, because the focus should not be moved away from Gaza. Focus is on Gaza, and that's why you don't see it as highlighted even within our community. We know we are having it badly in the West Bank, but our eyes are on Gaza today.
Yeah, I think there's two things about that. One is that, I mean, obviously, yes, right. Obviously, there's the scale of the just Gaza is just qualitatively different. If we want to come back and talk about Gaza, we can do that. But there's this kind of fear that the emphasis on Gaza, as justified as it is going to serve to kind of whitewash or cover up what's happening in the West Bank and make it sound like, oh well, everything's fine in the West Bank. It's just Gaza that you're concerned about, and because everything is not fine, it's not fine anywhere. And the other thing is, it's like, what happens after Gaza, right? Because I mean, West Bank is going to be the next in line. I mean, there's other places that are in line probably behind the West Bank, but the West Bank would be next.
Yeah, and I don't think that the West Bank is going to be in line. I think the West Bank is already in line. You know, like when you attack Jenin and when you attack Nablus and when you attack these cities and when you put curfews on them, and it is absolutely. And when you take, they already are preparing for, you know, Trump's promise of annexing the West Bank. I mean, that is definitely like not a theoretical, you know, political analysis by us saying, oh, look, they are going to do this next. That is reality. That is what they are doing, and that's what they are doing. And by declaration, you know,
Right.
they told us they are going to go into Lebanon, into Syria, into the West Bank. Yemen is coming. Iran probably will be in the next few years.
Right.
So,
Syria's entered
you know,
phase one, right?
yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's all a matter of where they are on the steps of progression, and Gaza's just the furthest along.
Yep. I totally agree. You know, so there is an operational plan, and I think orchestrated. I just want to make sure that people understand that their government, it's mainly the responsible party here, in addition to the Israelis. It's done by American, not only dollar, but by American weaponry. It's done by American blessing. It's done by American protection, both legally and politically, as well as, you know, in front of the public opinion. This is America's war.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, this is America's war.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're something like 80% of the weapons, and you know, they're just nothing. Gaza could not happen without the U.S. support. I mean, it's absolutely 100% essential. I mean, you know, the world community would have voted sanctions if we weren't there to constantly veto it. We're supplying most of the weaponry, you know, which they've said they essentially, you know, how far we can go just depends on how much we get from the United States. That's just
right.
They are the limiting factor. The only reason we're not doing more than we're doing right now is because the U.S. is only giving us this many tens of billions of dollars of weapons to use, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I think I always think of this disgusting display where the, you know, the U.S. government, you know, kind of cries these crocodile tears and pretends to care and say that they're trying to do everything, and we're doing everything possible to get a ceasefire. It is just, you know, the extent of the theater around this. I mean, building their humanitarian, you know, floating bridge or whatever it was that
wasn't that the biggest joke in history?
Only ever used to like help Israel mount attacks. You know,
exactly.
You know,
exactly.
Never used
exactly.
used for food, right? It's just, you know, falling apart. You know, it's like when they started, it was like, well, how many months is that going to take? There's people are needing this all right now. You know, why can't you just give it to them now? Like, open the door and let it in. It's like, oh, no, we have to build this weird ass. I mean, what was that all about? And it's like, it was the most ludicrous type of bizarre propaganda. I don't understand, you know, why they thought that was a good route to go, but it was like,
I think it bought them time. You know, I mean, honestly, like, I think to start with, I have to say that if America wanted the war to end, it can end it in 2 minutes. In 2 minutes. They can only say no weapons to you. And like you said, you know, we're just not going to protect you in the UN. We are in 2 minutes, the war can end. So to start with, let's make that clear. The second thing is
probably more like half an hour. They'd use up what they had.
I'll give you the 28 minutes. So half an hour. But you know, on the other hand, they didn't really need to pay $250 million to build a floating anything. I mean, they could have just told the Israelis, let the aid come in, because it's not only it's a moral thing to do, it's a legal thing to do. Like, there are crossings, there are multiple crossings.
Well, I think they had to maintain the propaganda that it was Hamas that was keeping the doors closed, right? Because I heard that when they had the resolution, you know, in the county board, right?
Yes.
You know, and we were in line, you know, to, you know, support the resolution that Clancy was proposing, right? And there was a couple of like really diehard Zionists in line right in front of us, and they were talking about, you know, how it was Hamas's fault that they were blocking the stuff from coming in. It's like, I mean, gosh, you know, if only some other country had a border with Palestine that
exactly.
that wasn't controlled by Hamas. I mean, if only there was some other country that bordered it where you could get the food in through.
And you know, if that's the argument, like, how is putting a pier in Hamas territory going to be any difference? I mean, it's just a useless piece of propaganda. And really, you nailed it. I mean, what happened is that pier was used to manage attacks, and that's the only thing they used it for. It's to get into special ops people into Gaza to do the killing of 250 Palestinians that they did. Like, it is obviously it was not meant to be a place where you can bring food that is enough to feed the strip, because the strip before the war, like, the strip needed like 500 to 600 big trucks to just be afloat, and as imprisoned as it was, to just stay minimum viable life kind of conditions, was like 600 some trucks. That pier would have never been able to sustain it, and obviously, like,
well, and
nobody talks
the
about
U.S.
it now.
government even said that. I mean, you had the head of the USAID saying this is a joke. I mean, I can't say this will ever be anywhere near sufficient. This is right. This is
Yeah,
she refused to go along with that line, right?
yeah,
And we're talking about someone who's like been pretty atrocious in other things, like Samantha Power. I mean, this is and she just like and there've been a lot of these administration officials. I mean, I don't know about a lot, but a fair number that have like said, I can't go along with this. I mean, you're asking me to promote like a line of view that is like so ridiculous that I just can't do it, because I don't want to sit. I just don't want to go around and mouth these words and be laughed at and like looked down on everywhere I go, because everyone I talk to knows they're ridiculous.
yeah,
But the
yeah. And let's
American
take it
people,
one step further. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I
I was
want to
going to
just say
say,
that.
I would say a segment of the American people does not see that as ridiculous. I mean, they're like so ignorant that they just like go along with the craziest stuff. But okay, what were you
Yeah,
going to
I
say?
know. The notion that America wants food and medicine to come into the Gaza Strip is absolutely ridiculous in the first place. I think America, in collaboration with the Israelis, want to make sure that these people are under maximum pressure. And I can give you the best example is right before the elections, when they pulled the trick of, we are going to give Israel 4 weeks to
Oh,
bring in aid into Gaza. Like, we are going to evaluate after that. And I think the idea was we will just give these pro-Palestinians kind of a bone, and maybe they'll vote for us. And so 4 weeks later, right after the elections, when it was clear by every account, by every report, that Israel didn't do enough, not
right.
even close to enough. Um, America still didn't act, and just looked the other way and said, we're
Yeah.
fine. What they're doing is enough.
Yeah,
So
there's some pretty uncomfortable press conferences where they said, "Well, was the deadline just not real? I mean, did they, it's like, I mean, it just passed. It's like, well, we're not paying about a lot of attention to that now. It's like,
yeah,
well, no,
elections are over, right?
yeah, exactly. It's like it served its purpose, which was to like just like to trick people until the
Yeah,
elections came
yeah.
back. I,
So, so this administration was in bed with Benjamin Netanyahu in his genocide, and I think America as a superpower, it's hard to hold it responsible. But in my book and in history, it will be the country that is aiding and abetting in the genocide, and it's absolutely responsible for it. And in my opinion, not only is Benjamin Netanyahu a war criminal, but also Biden and his administration. Everybody that went along and that funded and pressured. I mean, think about the fact that, and instead of pressuring the Israelis to stop the genocide, they are fighting the Yemenis who are trying to stop the Israelis from committing genocide. I mean, the empire is absolutely responsible for this.
go answer Allah. I mean, that's
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
the, I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, we had shows on Yemen. We're trying to get a couple of like other people to talk about Yemen, because that's another kind of overlooked. Although all these kind of overlooked areas that struggles in that area have all been kind of highlighted by this now, because it's like now everyone at least when you go on to like social media, there's at least a group of people that will talk about an axis of resistance that where they're talking about
Yep.
now it's like there's a lot of a lot of warmth towards Hamas and Hezbollah and all and Iran and all these places that may have their own warts here or there, but they are standing up to genocide, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
to varying degrees, and there's often a lot of criticism that they're not doing enough, but it's like I mean, in Yemen, it's like, wow, they're really doing something. I mean, they're doing what they can from where they are, and it's pretty impressive.
It's pretty impressive. And then instead of, and it's their legal obligation to do so, because as in the ruling back in January showed, is if you can't stop this genocide, you should do whatever you can to stop it. And so they took it to heart, and they are doing whatever they can to stop that genocide, and making it clear that all their policies will go away in the minute the Israelis stop their war. Like, it is clear that what they are doing is not an aggression that's coming from nothing. It's tied to the genocide. And yet,
Right.
instead of commending them for doing that, we are going to attack them and fight them. And because why? Because we want pro-empire countries. We want puppets. We do not want any country that can have its own kind of interest, its own national and kind of civil interest at heart. Like, we want the Saudis, we want the Emiratis, we want the people that we can move like pawn on a board. We want the King of Jordan.
Although our influence over the Saudis has not always been that robust. I mean, it's like they've made our ambassadors wait while they talk to the Chinese. They get on the phone with Putin 5 minutes after the U.S. ambassador leaves. I mean, it's like they say what the Biden said really wasn't true. It's like it's really there's been a real decline of influence. And we don't want people to have their own policies, but we also don't want people to just adhere to international law as opposed to like our weird version of our law. It's like, no, don't follow the UN charter. Follow our rules-based order, which we can't tell people what it means or what it is or what the rules are. We can just say,
we make up the rules as we go along.
Yep. Yeah, it's what works for me today. That's the rule.
Yeah, we want this. So it's like that.
But as the Saudis are concerned, I mean, no, they are absolutely in bed with the Americans, and I think they cannot exist for a minute if America moves its hands off of them. That's clear. Now, America gives a margin of movement for its puppets. Some of them get bigger margin than others, but.
Well, it's a classic problem of trying to have a puppet, and sometimes the puppet doesn't do what they're told, and sometimes you realize that there's the puppet actually has some say here. I mean,
let him do something that's irrelevant, but when it comes to Yemen, we are gonna make him fight in Yemen, and we are gonna give him every. I mean, what Israel did in Gaza is what the Saudis and the Emiratis did in Yemen, and they couldn't have done it without the absolute total access to American weaponry and weapon attaches, as well as the support, logistical support of everybody from the CIA to God knows where. I mean, the hundreds of thousands of Yemenis that died, their blood is in America's hand, as well as the Saudis. The Saudis couldn't have done it without the Americans, the same way the Israelis couldn't have done it without the Americans.
All true.
I'd like to raise the issue of American responsibility, not only the government, but each one of us. So many times I've heard, in school about what it was like, when people were under the Nazis and others didn't do anything. And so we are looking at something similar here. And now we're the ones who aren't doing anything or not doing much. At least most of the U.S. society. So I would like to ask, what can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think you are right. I mean, so you are right in that the moment today, I don't know about you guys, but when you read what happened back in the 30s and 40s, and you kind of think, oh, if I were there, I would never be an Nazi. Like, I would be marching in the streets with these communists and these this and that. This is your opportunity. But this is your opportunity today to show what you would have done back during the Nazi era. Would you have Would you have hidden a Jew or would you have given him up? This is what actually like what you can demonstrate today in your actions. And I know it's kind of sometimes too theoretical when people are across the pond from you, but
Right.
this is your doing. This is your tax money. This is your basically your resources that could be spent here at home.
Right.
This is of your interests as much as it is of the Palestinian interest, you know?
It's not a matter of your neighbors, it's a matter of your neighbors' relatives back home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what you can do, absolutely, you can come join us on the streets. I mean, that's one thing. You can educate yourself. That's another. You can make sure that
People don't want to
these,
educate themselves because the more they know, the more responsible they are.
yeah, make sure that you hold your two-faced politicians to task, and but again, like these politicians didn't come from nothing, they were produced by ignorance and by people buying and I have, and I don't want to sound nihilistic here, but I look at this society and I say, if you are not willing to do anything about guns when children in your schools are dying, you probably won't be willing to do much about Palestinians in Gaza. Um, and I think sometimes, like, I feel disheartened by the fact that we're not doing enough for people here. So the
Right.
expectations are low on Americans, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think one of the problems that we encountered is people feeling overwhelmed. And it's like, if there's this kind of perverse backwards effect where sometimes, I mean, you want to talk about this issue and you want to keep it present and you don't want people just to forget about it, but at the same time, they've done studies and people get too much information about this stuff, it's just too depressing and they just shut down. So it's like, you have to kind of try to aim for like some sweet spot where they're aware but they're not so aware that they get overwhelmed and overburdened and just give up. I mean, I think we've seen the same thing with climate change, and now we're seeing it with Gaza too, right? That
Yeah, yeah,
it's because so much of the news that comes out, if you get like a steady stream of this over social media, because you're not going to get it from mainstream media, but
no,
there's tons of this out there, right? If you follow the right people on Twitter, you can get these like extensive like daily briefings, this family's home was destroyed, this family's home was destroyed, and it's like, because there's tons of video coming out from Gaza still. And I mean, it's diminished a little bit because the capacity to record it and get it out is less than there was, and so there's more things that are happening in the dark, but there's still just tons of this.
And
And
many of the journalists have been killed too. So
yeah.
you aren't
Today
getting the
it's about
reports.
about 180 some journalists have been killed in Gaza.
I mean, it's the most dangerous place in the world for journalists. There's been nothing like this, in terms of, I mean, journalists being particularly targeted because they do get the information out, and it's like it's very clear that, you know, they just want Israeli soldiers' TikToks to reach people, and not,
Yep,
I
yep,
mean, it's bizarre because that's like
yep.
they have so many like self-laudatory confessing videos that they put out themselves, and yet there's a lot of like weird little contradictions in this. But it's yeah, it's I mean, you can, if you go out and look for this stuff, I mean, I can send links to people. I mean, there's stuff that comes out every day that is just heartbreaking.
Mm.
And it's like, it's frankly, it's just too much, I think, for most people to go through it all. It's just, there's just
It's, yeah, probably, but for people like me, I hold on to every piece of information I can hold on to because I think the memory of my people is really important to me. And, like no home should be demolished without us knowing about it. No child should die without us knowing their name. And um, I know it's heartening. I know it's really difficult, but I just cannot get away from being glued to all these resources and sources. Um, Sometimes it's harder. I wish I were in Gaza, and it might be really silly, but I really wish I was there because it's just easier to be part of, the stuff being done to you than being the watcher.
Mhm.
Um, Family and friends and people that we know, and it's just, yeah, the least I can do is not turn away.
Yeah, I don't know that it would be better to be there, but it certainly is its own type of hell to be like watching helplessly from the outside.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd rather be there, honestly. I know it's silly, but like I do. And I think one of the reasons is that the guilt you would feel about
Hmm.
doing anything normal, like um Sleeping. I mean, you take sleeping for granted. You take anything for granted. You're taking a shower for granted, and you are there. And especially people with children, when you see your child suffer, it's a totally different thing than if you are suffering yourself. Where your
Right.
helplessness towards your children is just
And
yeah.
and if Israel doesn't have enough bombs to keep you awake, they'll send quadcopters with amplified sound just to do it.
Yep. They'll make sure you don't sleep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to get to something that was a bit more hopeful, even though it is also a sad story. You mentioned the poet Wai Daka. I may have
Yes.
said his name wrong,
No,
but
no, you said it right. Walid Dakka, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could tell his story.
Yeah, so Walid Dakka is a Palestinian um, intellectual. He's a poet. He's a writer, and he was imprisoned back in the first Intifada and imprisoned for basically for life. Um, and he was really kind of adored by the Palestinian society as a whole. He was very well spoken, and towards kind of the last few years, he got sick, and medical neglect in Israeli prisons, if you can believe it, is rampant. I mean, they if you have any kind of disease, you are gone and you are done for. Walid actually got married once whilst in prison. He, as many Palestinian prisoners have done in the past, as a way of resisting and as a way of continuing their line, he actually smuggled out his semen. Um, and before he died, he had a daughter, and his daughter came with her mom to a conference we had in Detroit just back in May, and such a lovely little thing. And um, life will find a way, as they say. That is really like his last act of defiance and resistance was the creating of his daughter, in spite everything, like in spite the Israelis, in spite the prison guards, in spite of everything that he was facing. Um, he did that, and that story is really inspirational for our people. Like we have no choice, but to continue to live. Anything else is not acceptable. And so we will have to do what we need to do to make that possible.
It's interesting that even just living, managing to live, is a form of resistance.
Can you believe it? I mean,
Hmm.
yeah. So that's why the Israelis are really at a loss, right? Because in Gaza, the way they can win the war is by killing every single Palestinian. Like that's the only way, really, um, because since living is a sign of resistance, if you leave us alive, then we won. and
Hmm.
and that's usually their biggest problem, is that, like, well, if these guys are not killed, well, we lost. Um, and yes, living alone is enough to be seen as a victory.
I'm afraid I wish we had more time to talk to you because it's really I don't know, say it's been fun exactly, but it's been really good to have you. So
Oh,
um,
thank you for having me. I
uh,
really appreciate it.
definitely, and I'd love to have you back again.
Thank you.